Welcome to this episode of a Creative Approach podcast. I'm your host, Karen Poirier-Brody. I know you'll enjoy my guest on today's show. Jill Sprott loves writing, and poetry is a passion, and she also loves and has an excellent talent for visual storytelling. For me, it's been a crafty start to the new year. Still, it's too easy to use my hobbies to defer from doing some important things I ought to do. It has much to do with the seasonal emotional lows, I think. I just need to get outside more. My scrapbooking time has been productive, though, and I even made it to my local scrapbook store, which is not so local as it's in Dixon, California, about 45 minutes from me. Still, playing with paper in a class with the talented Daniela Costa and seeing the friendly owners of It's All About the Scrapbook, Yvonne and Andrea, was a treat. The social aspects of a hobby are sometimes as important as the activity itself. Much of the country has been experiencing bitter cold and lots of snow. I hope you're staying warm and are safe. Here in California, we were balancing our enjoyment of a mild winter with the fear of drought, but now it looks like Mother Nature is bringing us well-needed rain and a generous snowpack. Like many people, the new year inspires me to get organized. Last year, I approached my wardrobe with the assistance of the delightful and talented Shantara Gunn. She was a featured guest on episode 15 of a Creative Approach podcast. This year, I'm considering hiring a household organizer to help me get my paperwork and possessions together. I have a feeling it will be empowering. I want a more sustainable and uncluttered life. My oldest son was teasing me at Christmas about my clutter. I'll let you know how that goes. Now to the show today and my conversation with the delightful Jill Sprott. Hi there. Today I have as my guest Jill Sprott, who is a storyteller. And of course, I love stories. So welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thanks. And I think, usually I get into talking about what it is that people do. And I know you through Get It Scrapped, which is a site where I'm on the creative team and you're one of the teachers.
Right.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit more because I think you do a whole lot of other things because I've been browsing around the internet about you. But I haven't spent a whole lot of time, so I'm going to get filled in here because I like a few surprises. So why don't you give us a little rundown on what the things that you're into right now?
Let's see, so much.
Well, that's good.
In addition to being a complete scrapbooking junkie, I'm also an English teacher. So really, it's funny to be introduced as a storyteller because I don't often think about myself that way, but I think you're right. I mean, by day, I'm all about telling stories and studying stories with my students. And then by night, I'm telling stories through the form of scrapbooking. And because I'm part of so many scrapbooking communities, I'm also so interested in other people's stories. So really, my life is nothing without story, right? It's just the center of everything.
Right. And so you said you're part of all these scrapbook sites. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of those places where you might be found or where you're doing some of this work.
Sure. Well, I have my own blog, so there's that sort of, individual approach to it. But a lot of the communities that I'm part of kind of sprung up in kind of the demise of the end of the local scrapbook store or the online scrapbook store. It's so sad, but it's funny because the community is resilient. People are adapting and finding ways to still find each other, and share their love of the craft. Sounds like witchcraft, sorry. The love of the craft, right? The dark gift. And so one of the places that I frequent often is Hip Kit Club. They have an online community where actually several. They have, their own kind of shop that you can visit at their site. But on Facebook, they have a community forum. And so that's a really supportive way of kind of seeing what everybody's up to. Allie Edwards, she has another forum on Facebook. There's also Scrapbook Like a Superhero, so Shamel. So I'm a part of lots of different groups online. A lot of them just kind of sprung up as hey, is anybody out there? And then these communities start thriving and very organic, the way they come together. I think it's a neat way of kind of knowing that when you put something out there into the universe, there are other people there, who are wanting to connect, who are interested in hearing what your story is and sharing their own. So I really love these online communities, especially being in Hawaii. There's not exactly kind of a huge, abundant, community of scrapbookers here. I've always kind of gone it alone. And so to know that there's these links that I can, depend upon to still feel like I'm connected to something bigger, it's just been really valuable to me.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, I think I've actually been in a scrapbook store. I think it was in Maui
Right,
once,
right.
but it's not exactly anywhere now, even the big cities. It's hard sometimes to find things like scrapbook stores. And, I think for people who aren't scrapbookers, and they know that I am and that you are, but there are different supplies of papers and embellishments and cards and things that one can get, but you can also make things. And I love seeing how you put a lot of stuff together. You have a nice style. I've been checking that out today. And you get a lot of your stories onto a piece of paper, which I think is great. I see how you use a lot of little cards that you fill in with bits and pieces of the story, or you create columns with bits of the story in different pieces on the side or in rows. It's interesting visual approach to seeing how you get your story in there besides all the pictures and papers and embellishments.
It's kind of a hodgepodge. It's funny because I think, style evolves. When I was first starting, a lot of people would talk about, so-and-so style, or what's my style, or I'm trying to find my style. And I had no idea what they were talking about. Like, what do you mean style? I knew it in a literary sense, how one writes. But in the scrapbooking world, it's funny. It becomes something that defines you. People recognize you right away, without even a name attached to the page. They can kind of sense, a vibe, through layouts. And it's funny how the way that you create really identifies who you are. So for me, my style, I think it is kind of eclectic, but it comes about, I think, maybe because of my circumstances, like how I said earlier, kind of being sort of isolated from others. A lot of it was just sort of experimentation, self-taught, I like this, let me try that. And I didn't really have kind of a community of croppers, people to kind of come together and say, oh, here's how you do this. Here's how you use a die cut machine. Like everything was sort of like, internet, help me, And so over time, it just became a kind of self-reliance. Like there's not really a right and wrong. Just try it, just play, just see where it takes you. And that turned out to be the best thing, it's just sort of relinquishing this idea of rules to follow, a set of directions or guidelines. And then that spirit of play is what keeps me going with it. It's why I love doing what I do.
The funny thing to me is that sometimes when you first look at your page, you see a lot of little bits of things, but there's such strong organization and structure that you were saying not following rules, but it seems to me it's like a whole gathering of stuff, but then it's all very, very well thought out. I mean, do you have a background in art at all? I know you teach, but
see, that's the funniest thing. Periodically I think about this, right? Just the other day I was telling my students about this horrible Christmas ornament that I was forced to make when I was a fifth grader. Every year, I went to public school, and I was the only Howley kid. I guess Howley means nothing to you, but Howley is like
white.
Fair skin, white, right? Yeah, exactly. And so I was the only kid that had blonde hair there. So I always felt kind of like the oddball and whatnot. And my self-confidence was really low. I was a shy kid to begin with. It was tough. And art for me was just as difficult as PE. I felt so exposed in front of everybody, worried about doing it right. And the thing about art in an elementary school is you have to do it in front of others, right? You can't just kind of go into your own little sanctuary and just see what happens and feel safe. So at home, I could draw pictures and, write journals and be creative. But in school, I felt so guarded all the time. I'd cry constantly in art class and PE class. But, it was this fear of kind of, one more thing to make me look, different. And I never saw difference as a good thing growing up. I wanted to blend. So yeah, art was sort of something that rubbed against me the wrong way, in school. But at home, I loved it. I loved coloring and, just kind of seeing where it took me. So it was just sort of two selves. So when I think about art classes, I avoided them like the plague. I didn't take one until college. And then I had to take it because it was part of their core requirements. But there it was different. You go to class to listen to the lectures, and then they give you these art assignments just to kind of dabble and see, here's how the artists do it, take inspiration from them. But you could do it on your own. And that's where I really grew to love it, to kind of realize like, hey, I can actually do this, and everybody has these different interpretations and nobody's kind of judging each other because we all feel sort of awkward. So it wasn't until I was about 18, 19 where I thought, I like art, like really like it, That's a really kind of late realization for me. So when I became a teacher and I started teaching, 5th, 6th grade, art is part of the curriculum. And so for me, it was important, I think, to teach my kids kind of to adjust their philosophy, to kind of think about, okay, everybody's going to do something different here. Don't be afraid, and kind of laying the ground rules. Because I remembered what it was like to be a kid and feeling all this pressure when it came time to create. And so, I don't know, I can't imagine now my life without art. But I think we go back to the pages, why they are the way they are. I think that actually has more to do with my literary influences than my artistic ones. I grew up reading. I'm a huge lover of literature, English teacher, English major. I got my MA in English. Everything's English, right?
Right.
But the thing about a work of literature, right, is it's similar. It's all these parts and pieces, so many elements, but they all converge to kind of communicate theme. There's something that sort of unifies a work of literature. When it's done really well, you kind of see through it, right? Every bit, every character, every word just kind of clicks into place. And I think that idea of convergence is what guides my own process. I only add pieces in a way that feel mindful to me. This is why it's really hard for me to work, for instance, with kids. Sometimes, like kid clubs, when I have to use certain elements, it feels like such a challenge. So I really still only use them if I feel like it fits the story. It kind of works with what I'm trying to communicate. So I guess I approach art like a writer in a way. Like, what's the story I'm trying to tell? And does this fit? And if not, it has to go. I can't make it work.
But you do use a lot of little elements and, put them together. But they're all like little pieces that are very similar. I notice how you kind of like madly stitch a bunch of things down.
Yes.
Gather things together in a nice line or row. And use, like I said, little bits of the story and pieces, like they are paragraphs, but they're cut out in pieces of paper, or sometimes some vertical. Mm-hmm. Like at 45 degrees, you write something into a column,
right,
apart from the rest of the page and story. So I thought some really interesting techniques. And I said to myself, because I am someone who, I know I have a little bit of there's certain elements of style that I have, but I like to explore a lot of things. And right now I'm trying to take on people like you who are paper crafters and interpret those in Digi and see how.
Oh, wow.
And it's a way to understand the structure of a page.
Right.
So I said, she's going to be a challenge.
Funny. I've tried Digi and it's so difficult for me. But the funny thing is when I do use it, because I've created some hybrid pages, I still have the same tendency. I'll take tiny portions and pieces, and just use like sections of things. I've bought digital kits. I still buy Digi periodically, like rarely, but it happens if I really like something. And so, for instance, let's say it's like a piece of Digi pattern paper, right? Generally, I won't use like the whole sheet, just kind of use it as a background. I'll use like little sections of it and kind of, add it into something. I don't know what it is. My eye just kind of moves toward detail more than kind of the bigger picture. Maybe it's because I'm a really messy person. I'm not really like a everything in its place kind of person. I like stacks of things. It's really weird. Like how you're mentioning lines. That's sort of my organizational approach. Lines and stacks, but lots of little bits and pieces everywhere. I don't know. I'm not a Martha Stewart.
Now I'm just envisioning you as an English teacher. So are you into a lot of diagramming and dissection for your students? Or?
Not anymore. Thank goodness diagramming has gone the way of the dinosaur. Some people still swear by it, but I'm more holistic.
More holistic. And what grade do you teach?
Now I teach high school. So I have freshmen, juniors, and seniors.
Well, that
wonderful.
Yes. So most of you, while you did take some art in college, obviously that was not your major subject. Your major subject was English.
Yes.
So what first got you getting, you teach scrapbooking and things, and what, you said you got into this sort of through these different things online, but what first inspired you to become a scrapbooker?
It's funny to use the word inspired. It was sort of a reluctant process. I had a few friends that were really into the whole creative memories trend. This is the early days of scrapbooking.
Yeah, that's a while back.
Around, like 1998, 2000, right around there. And, the thing about creative memories is it was, I don't know, sort of I don't know how to explain it, kind of the Costco of scrapbooking, right? Like there was just sort of something for everyone and everything was kind of ready made and it was very efficient, and it worked, I think, to really draw people into the hobby because you didn't really have to worry too much about where does this go or how do I do this? There were page maps to follow,
Yeah, a formula. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But I wasn't interested in it. I looked at it and thought, why would anybody do that? And, and again, maybe it comes right back down to style. I looked at the pages that were being generated and they were just not anything that spoke to me. Everything was sort of large blocks and insert this here. And so my friends, their approach was just very simple, but they weren't really just telling stories. They were just taking their pictures and adding some stickers, and that was the end of it. But it's funny because I looked at it and thought, well, my whole life I've kind of been doing this. I've kept journals since I was in the 5th grade, and, to thumb through them, they're not just words. I would periodically, kind of doodle, draw, add pictures and things like that in there. And I was obsessed with stickers, as an 80s kid, right? Stickers and the color purple. Not the book, The Color Purple, but the color purple.
Oh, you must love the color of the year for 2018.
Oh my gosh, yes. I actually don't have an aversion to it. I know people are having a hard time with that one, but I'm kind of excited.
Yeah.
So it was funny because, growing up in that era, I don't know, there was a lot to document, I guess. Everything was sort of colorful and I don't know, you're a kid and I'm telling my stories through my journals, but I'm not just telling kind of straight, boring stories, not just I brush my teeth today. Over time, I'm kind of learning to bare my soul and, really get in touch with who I am through my journals. And being such an introverted kid, they were my outlet. And so when I kind of, flash forward and I'm an adult now and I have a baby and my friends are showing me, scrapbooking, do this, it's a way of documenting your childhood and your child's childhood. And I got kind of excited about it, but it just didn't appeal to me. And then I was walking maybe a few months after they kind of invited me over and I was sort of observing and not really doing. I was walking through a store, I think it was Borders, back when Borders was still around, and the magazine section. And there was Simple Scrapbooks magazine, and I'm looking at the section. There's a whole section just for scrapbooking, and the layouts in those magazines look so different from what I saw with the creative memory stuff. There was story there. There were articles there about journaling. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to not just put a picture on a page and put some stuff on it. I want to tell stories. And that's what drew me in. I realized I'm ready for this. I've been doing this all along, but this kind of gives me a more colorful, creative way of doing this. And so initially what drew me in was just my daughter, wanting to make sure I didn't forget the details of her growing up so quickly. But it became bigger than that. The stories that I started recording were similar to those you'd see in the magazines where, they would remind you to kind of set aside time for yourself, tell your story. Don't let it kind of fall away and just make yourself, the observer in your own life. And so it branched out. The magazines challenged me. And then I found 2 peas in a bucket through one of the magazines. There's a little ad in the back. And that was the community that really set me free. I didn't share any of my pages with anyone until 2 peas. They had a gallery. And I think I was a member for something like 2 years before I even dared share my first layout. And then when I did, everybody was so welcoming. And, looking back at those early layouts, they're pretty rough, but it was great. Nobody said, this is terrible. What are you doing here? Instead they were just sort of, they were reading the story. They weren't like, why did you put that sticker there? It wasn't trivial. It was, this is such a beautiful way of talking about, your daughter's 5th birthday or, they saw right through to what you're trying to do and they got it.
Yeah.
And so I know that's the hard thing. That's the scrapbooker's burden, right? Like the world wants to make fun of it. We're kind of a punchline for some people. You watch any kind of sitcom, like I think it was Life in Pieces had a joke about scrapbookers and craft stores being like the most feral of them all, and like, it's funny, right? I can laugh at it, but at the same time I get it. Like people who don't craft, who don't kind of get into it, they see it as something kind of silly, But when you actually are part of the community, you realize it's so valuable. It's just, it changes you.
It's funny, but, people do that about a lot of hobbies. And I wonder if it's because they try them and they aren't successful and they give up and then they ridicule, because it seems to me, it happens with knitting, it happens with sewing, but it happens with woodworking and with stamp collecting and all kinds of interesting hobbies that people have that I think are just fascinating and I'd love to be good at. But
and even
for some people, they just can't get past thinking it's silly.
Exactly. But also look at those hobbies generally are the domain of women and the marginalized, like stamp collecting generally, the high school quarterback doesn't do it, right? But the science team's, president or something, right? Like, I don't know. Like, and I think scrapbooking, knitting, a lot of those hobbies are traditionally the domain of women. And so we look upon them as kind of traditionally, as kind of frivolous, like trifles,
Well, and some of us might think football, where you get your brain smashed in, is a little weird.
Yeah.
Having had as one of my sons was an excellent athlete. It was kind of, you mentioned the things that kids trivialize are different, because I remember his being in the 9th grade and playing football. He was the quarterback and stuff. And this fellow who was the drama teacher, turned to my husband and said, "That kid there, he's in my drama class," or something. My husband turned to him and said, "He's my son." It's just funny, but the fact that it was one of those things is like usually the quarterback is not in the drama club.
Exactly. And that's the funny thing, right? Because if you really get to know people in the scrapbooking community, they'll surprise you. Yeah. From the outset, you make all these generalizations about them, but they're from all walks of life, all areas of the world. It's a global community. It's amazing. All socioeconomic backgrounds. It's not just something that rich white women do,
No, and those of us who maybe fall into that category are also people who have had, careers or are in careers, people who are physicians like I am, or lawyers, or other types of professions that people do. And some people who really are fine artists who found a way of expressing themselves with scrapbooking as well. Yep. They may produce some absolutely exquisite works of art in some other area, but they also find scrapbooking as a way of expressing things. Of course, I think a lot of people are scrapbookers and don't realize it. I've said on this program many times that people who keep up on Facebook are digital scrapbookers, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Think about it. I mean, even what the people who study kind of, who focuses on which Facebook posts, it's the ones with the words and pictures that draw us in, right? I mean, It's interesting. It's just such a simple formula, but it's effective.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I'm looking for a picture because I've made some really great posts, but I didn't accompany them with a picture, and I think they were totally overlooked. Right,
exactly. Because in this day and age, there's visual storytelling, and not just verbal, written kind. When you can pull those two together, you get this really dynamic way of storytelling. And what you're saying earlier about, this diverse community, I think that's the reason why the community endures. It makes us better. The more diversity we see within it, the different approaches, different forms of expression, we all kind of learn from that and grow and build on that.
Yeah, and it truly is a wonderful, many of us have made friends in other countries just because of the internet and being able to connect and know each other because of the stories we tell.
Exactly.
And your pages do not have, we went to the park and had fun. They really go into some depth and help people tell their stories. Now, where are you teaching right now besides Get It Scrapped?
That's it. So Get It Scrapped is where I do most of the classes. Periodically, I'll be asked to do workshops and things like that. But for the most part, it's Get It Scrapped. And I love Get It Scrapped because it's not consumerist. You know what I mean? It's there to, I teach this class called Popular Culture and Writing, and one of the hardest articles we read is basically talking about capitalism and consumerism's role in pop culture. But there's this interesting line in it that talks about how, capitalism at its best, it's not just something that's for profit, it's altruistic. Like it serves others, it serves a purpose. I think that's what Get It Scrapped is for me. It's why I really believe in it, because it isn't just about, let me sell you this product, right? It's actually also performing a service in the process.
Exactly. It's selling classes, but the classes there's not a particular product in terms of something really, I mean, there's things offered that are, a book online, or they are a template that you can use to help structure your scrapbooking. So it's not totally willy-nilly, but
exactly,
it doesn't, you don't buy a certain amount of paper, you don't buy a certain amount of kits, and it talks about, and it includes other people's templates and stories and classes.
Exactly.
in a very, and there is that real sense of community.
Exactly.
Which is lovely. And of course, it's transitioned more to Facebook. I kind of miss having a regular gallery, though.
I absolutely agree.
A site where you can actually have things collected. It's really hard to page through Facebook posts. As much as I like getting those periodic messages, I sometimes like to go back and just kind of wander through a collection.
Exactly. I miss the traditional, the threaded forum and the galleries, like everything, where it was supposed to be. And you didn't miss anything,
Right. Things evolve a bit, but, maybe we'll go back to some kind of mixed structure. It'd be interesting to see how things develop online, because they go through certain things. And then I think, there's always revivals of things, and there are definitely merits to the way we used to do things as well as merits to how we do things now. So
right.
I keep hoping, maybe we'll come up with some hybrid thing that just feels right. But
I think we'll get there.
And so now you live in Hawaii. Have you always lived in Hawaii?
Yes, born and raised.
Well, you mentioned your childhood, so I thought, And so on Oahu?
Yep.
Oh, great. Yeah, having been there a little bit. I've had family who've lived in Hawaii, so.
Oh, wow.
It's a cool place. And so that probably, do you think that where you live plays an influence in your creativity and what you do?
Absolutely. And again, that goes back to writing too, right?
Yeah.
Every author is grounded in place in some form, And I'm not saying that I'm like Faulkner or Poe or anything, but Hawaii is definitely a huge inspiration to me. And again, it goes back to a lot of the things we've talked about already. It's diversity, color, it's hodgepodge in its own way, right? It's my scrapbook style is a plate lunch, it's just got a little bit of everything in it.
Yeah, well, I think there's something about Hawaii. You said the mix of cultures, and there is a certain Hawaii to me and storytelling go together.
Mm-hmm.
That's a strong tradition in Hawaii.
Absolutely.
And certainly, and it's interpreted in different ways in dance, certainly. In the hula, that's a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a beautiful one. But
totally.
You're exposed to all kinds of beautiful colors and talking about, maybe I can understand why sometimes I see all these little bits of detail and things like that. Having lived your entire life in Hawaii, that probably inspires your style.
And it's actually why I think I don't think I'll ever leave, I love it. It's so beautiful.
Well, it is. It's gorgeous. Now, living on an island, though, is just not something I could never really get into that. I have, even on a big island.
Travel, right?
Pardon me?
The drawback here is really no travel. Like if I want to go off island, I have to spend so much money on a plane ticket. It's expensive. Yeah, it's so limited.
And you have to plan that out. Well, even on a big island, I was thinking, my mother lived on Vancouver Island in Victoria. Okay. And I have a lot of, I have family who live in Victoria. And I think, I don't think I'd want to live here. You got to plan your life around planes or the ferry.
Yep.
You can't just take off, get in the car and drive halfway across the country. You're going to have to fix a set time before you can set off on this journey.
Yep, exactly.
And it's a little bit more complicated. But
yeah, especially with a family. If it's just one person, I guess, it's just you buying plane tickets all the time. But with a family, it's hard to travel with them.
Yeah. But on the other hand, these islands are wonderful for me to visit.
Oh, absolutely. They're so beautiful.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about, so you're living in Hawaii and you have this beautiful environment to inspire you. But how about, other inspirations? Are people in your family creative people? Were there certain teachers or things in school, or what led you into your path, do you think?
That's a tricky one. I guess my mom wanted to be an English teacher, but she was of an era, of a family, where once you hit a certain age, it was time to get married, pop out those babies. And so she kind of put her dreams on hold. And so when she raised me, it's funny because I think inadvertently she raised the English teacher, She always started me with books and with writing, and she was extremely artistic. So I remember growing up and, we'd be coloring with crayons and she's drawing just freehand, beautiful horses and portraits of people. And I was just in awe, of all that could come out of this hand, it was amazing. And she couldn't really explain how she knew, she had no training. It was just something that was sort of natural to her. But she cultivated that in me, this idea of expression. No other family member did. They're all working class and there's like no time for art, it's not a functional thing. But with my mom, it was just an important part of my upbringing to her, And then when I went to school, I was placed in regular classes with all the other kids, extremely shy, but then they noticed one day that I had done all my homework for the year. The teacher looked through the workbooks. She's like, this is all complete. It was November. And I did it just because I didn't want to do homework, and so they put me in an honors class, which I don't know if I should have been there or not, but that was their answer to it. What do you do with the kid that's done all the work? Okay, just put her someplace else. So that honors class, though, changed my life. There was a teacher there, Miss Jocelyn Mokulehua, and this is, I guess, the early years of, GT or honors classes where they didn't quite know what they were doing with these kids. They just knew they learned differently. And so it was this very unstructured environment where, when we'd write stories, we'd also illustrate we'd turn them into books and we'd illustrate them. And she'd teach us book binding techniques. I mean, it was really crazy, but it was amazing. All of our projects, they always involve some huge art component. So even though I think back, I never thought of it as a kid as art class. It was English class to me, but she built this fusion of English and art all the time overlapping and never kind of let me think I wasn't able. And so everything I did was sort of celebrated and honored. Every child in that class got to kind of find out, what their limits were. And we didn't really have them, as far as she was concerned. And so it was that teacher, I think, that really made me think that I had a valuable voice, a kind of good and worthy voice. And so she was a really formative influence to me. And then when I hit 7th grade, there was another teacher who did something similar. Every Friday was creative writing day, but she always had an art component attached to it. And so growing up through school, I think every time I would write something, there was always a sort of visual aspect of it. And I think that still influences me today.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like it would be inevitable that you'd be a scrapbooker then.
Right, exactly.
With that kind of inspiration. And then when it comes to how do you think literature influences what you do in your scrapbooking, besides the fact that you like to tell stories?
Maybe the way I tell them. I love poetry. And I notice a lot of times, whether I like it or not, certain techniques kind of invade the space. I was reading something I wrote on one of my pages the other day, and I'm just cracking up laughing, just at all the repetition, the way that I lay out lines sometimes, it looks like poetry. And it happens almost unconsciously. Like, it just happens. I use metaphor a lot. It's not just in the words, but in the approach to the page. Like if you look at certain patterns, the images and whatnot might be, it might not seem to have a connection to the actual message, but they really do. Like the journaling plus the pattern will kind of make you see, oh, there's a metaphor happening here. There's something bigger happening. It's bizarre, but it happens again, sometimes without me realizing it. I don't sit there going, I am going to create a metaphor. It just happens kind of organically.
Well, that's the best way. But obviously, what you've experienced is going to show up in your work. So that's really cool. I mean, the creative process is interesting, how it works in all of us.
Definitely.
And I think, it's nice to kind of I like the analysis of people's style and getting in. And like I said, when I interpret paper into digital, it gives me a real chance to try and understand what people are doing. And it seems to work even better than when I'm trying to copy a page, and make it in paper.
Right.
I don't know why, but somehow for me that works. Maybe it's those layers and the structure and just having to think of how do you approach this that really pulls that in. But, different things seem to linger, and then it probably influences my style. Now, as to So teaching, I guess, that was something you were inspired to do, and it comes pretty naturally as far as being a scrapbook teacher, since you are a teacher in your, in real life, I guess we call it.
In real life.
What you do for money.
Yes.
Because, scrapbooking is nice, but I'm sure it's not super lucrative.
No. Not for me.
Not for most of us, because we end up, anything that we get, we probably spend on other things. Yeah, related to the hobby.
Yep.
But, which is true of a lot of things. But I think, does online teaching differ a whole lot from being in the classroom for you? I mean, how would you compare that?
Yes. So I've taught as young as fourth grade and as old as college students. And when I taught at the college level, initially I was an in-person teacher, and then they kind of pushed online courses. That was kind of a new direction, And so when I started teaching college online, it was challenging. Something was missing for me, and it was a connection. I could deliver the content, but I couldn't create relationship, and that is why I felt not like a failure, but just I knew that I was more of an instructor than a teacher, through that online format. And so, after that kind of first semester, I tried to diversify my techniques, my approaches, inviting students to chat more often. But even then, it was just something that didn't quite push through. This is the early days of online teaching, where we didn't have a whole lot of digital tools to kind of help us, It was just very simple interfaces. And so when I started teaching scrapbooking classes and workshops online, I think voice was a big component of that successful effort to teach. I think it is through text. We don't always come through as human. No matter how amazing we are as writers, when we're trying to teach something, I think it was helpful to hear a human voice, to actually hear, the storyteller's voice. And so when I think about online teaching now, I try to make sure that whether it's, through voice or in writing, that I try to keep a certain degree of levity there, that I make light of myself and my own mistakes. I remind whoever's listening, that it's okay not to know everything. And I think by being fully present in that way, I think it makes teaching more effective. That's the only thing I can think of that's effective. Online teaching, the only way it's really going to work is if we can maintain our humanity through it all.
Yeah, I found one of the things, I took a college class, and the instructor said in order to keep it from being just like a correspondence course that, she had to have people have discussions. But I would have appreciated having more. She never did any audio or video presentations in it. And to me, that really left a big hole. I mean, I went and met with the teacher in person because I just felt this can't be, I can't do this without some kind of audio or, some kind of connection. And
exactly,
I think a little bit of a voice presentation or some type of visual would have been very helpful.
Definitely.
So I'm sure they did try to keep it from being a correspondence course by having discussion among the students, which was great, but it still didn't really make quite the connection that I would have liked. And obviously, when you're teaching a classroom, you have that connection all the time.
Exactly.
And those hands up all the time. Asking things. So teaching online, you said, being very different that way with your students. And then, of course, it's kind of a difference in age group, too.
Yes.
And people are coming from very different backgrounds, I assume.
Right.
Where that's not necessarily true in a classroom. They're just a bunch of kids who may have had a similar life course by the time they're coming to you. Right.
And at the college level, I had students who were stationed overseas, they're in the military, and you start to realize there are different needs here, and the online course exists to address those needs, but there's also that need for connection, and that's really on the instructor, really try, to find ways of connecting. It's really difficult sometimes. But it's the same thing with the scrapbooking world, right? And these online classes that you see, there's no way you can just have them in person. You could do that, but it'd be very costly, involving, air travel. But, right?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I love going to some of these retreats and things, but they are expensive, yes.
But to make, the knowledge that all of these people have more accessible and create more community, the tools we have are amazing now. And I love that we can use different resources to make greater connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fun to be able to have, and you can have really close and very interesting connections with people online. I think some people who don't use the internet so much are probably amazed at how connected people are. I mean, I did a previous podcast for a year and a half with 3 other people that I have never met in person.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Ever. Though I hope to meet some, and I feel like a really strong connection with Christy Strickler, who lives in Abu Dhabi. But, you know, she's halfway around the world from me. But, right. And I did that podcast with her for a long time. But, you know, you feel very connected. But I have, you know, people who I've known in various other parts of the world, too. And it's really amazing how close and connected we can be because of the internet. I suppose in another generation, people will probably look back at this conversation and say, what were they talking about? Of course.
Exactly.
This is just so every day.
Yep.
And yet, you know, we're kind of amazed that we have this now, even still. Although I think we've felt that way for a little while here, that we can make these deep connections with people in this way. And that's why I enjoy doing this show, of being able to have conversations with people in many areas, like, you know, Hawaii or across the world, and talk to them about things we're passionate about, and learning about people's sense about creativity, which is probably something that, you know, I usually transition from going to finding out what people are up to. And in fact, we left out one thing we've mentioned a million times, your blog, not a million times, but a few times, but we don't have your blog address. So I'd love to have that. You know, we'll connect people online to the show notes, but we can just have you give us where people could find you here before we get into more of a discussion of just creativity in general. But where can we find you?
Yeah, it's Blogspot. So it's wordplaywordwork.blogspot.com. Okay. Wordplaywordwork.blogspot.com.
Okay, well, we'll put that down. Wordplay, word work.
Yeah.
So play and work, words. Very good. I think we have that good connection. And then how long have you been doing that blog?
Oh, wow. Well, I had a personal one that I first started with when I was afraid to share anything that I did. And then this one, I think since 2008, I want to say.
Oh, wow. So a long time. Yeah, very good. It looked like you'd been doing it for a while, but I wasn't quite sure exactly how long. So, and there's where people could find connections to you in other places, right?
Right.
Like, I think Pinterest, is that where I saw you showing up a lot?
Yep. I put a lot of my pages there. And then, of course, I like Pinterest because it's not just your work, right? It shows what catches your eye. I think you can learn a lot about people by noticing, you know, what they like. How do they see the world? You know, I like these. I love looking at pin boards. It just kind of reveals people's individuality.
I think you're right about that. I don't spend a lot of time on Pinterest. I mean, you know, there's only so much social media one can do. And I focus more on Facebook than anything. But I do Pinterest. You're right. That is one thing I've observed. And one of the things I do like about it is seeing what people are into as well as what they also create and put there. So it's a way of hearing more about their story. And the other place, of course, right now is that you're a teacher at Get a Scrap. So I'm sure people can go there to find you as well. And now I'm being a little scattered here today. Normally I'm a little bit more together, I think. Anyways, well, I was going to talk to you a little bit about your thoughts. I mean, you work with students every day trying to encourage their creativity in your classroom, and you work with scrapbookers and your own personal creativity. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about creativity in general that you could share with us.
It's a tall order.
Yeah.
Thoughts about creativity. Wow. I teach a poetry workshop class, right, to my high school students. Early on, one of the first things we have to kind of, you know, address is this idea of creativity. A lot of them are so fearful as they walk in. You know, they've chosen to take the class, but at the same time, they feel like maybe they're not worthy. Maybe they shouldn't take it. Maybe they can't, write poetry or understand it, and have they made a terrible mistake, So they walk in with that mindset, and that right away is just going to cripple them, right? Every poem is going to be kind of shuttered, already with this fear, and they won't really be able to be creative. Part of it is understanding, first and foremost, that creativity is about embracing your own take on the world. And that's it. And so if you're full of fear, and kind of trepidation about, should I do this or can I do that? Is this okay? Am I doing it right? You're not trusting yourself to just sort of see what's possible. And so helping students to first and foremost just trust themselves. And I know it sounds sort of trite, but that idea like there are no mistakes. There can be errors, sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to creativity, the idea is even in experimentation, even in play, there's discovery, and you won't find out anything. You won't learn anything about yourself, and about your own process, your own poetry, your own art, without first taking these risks. A term I love is the creative risk, and those two terms really do go together, creative risk, because I think every act of creativity carries with it some risk, but we kind of need to be more like embracing our internal bungee jumpers. We just got to go for it sometimes, right? And know that we're going to spring back. But when we spring back, we're going to see the world a little differently. We've done something now that's changed our vantage point. And I think that's the way I see creativity, that it comes first and foremost down to the individual spirit, and kind of understanding that on the other side of creative risk is a greater self-discovery as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think sometimes too, I appreciate the fact that poetry seems more accessible now. Different ways of expressing ourselves work. That's one good thing about the internet, is being exposed to all these different things, because I think the kind of street poetry that there is now, where people can speak from their heart, their experience, the poetry of rap, different things, that poetry is a lot more constrained and confined and rule driven and organized when I was in school.
Right.
It did not, I really loved poetry, and I loved the expression and the way people could use a phrase and express so much, but it didn't really speak to me quite the way that I think poetry does nowadays.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, even that kind of old school formalist approach to poetry that you're talking about, it still has a purpose. But I don't actually tackle that stuff with my students until about halfway through. First they need to understand, like, every poem, no matter, what it is, and whether they're writing it or somebody else wrote it, is somebody else's, like a link to another person's self. It's an individual's contribution. And so when we start studying it, we look at things like villanelles, and sestinas, and at that point, they actually feel confident, like, I can do this. Yes, there are rules for this, but I can enter this poem. I can talk about it. Poetry is more accessible to them, and they don't see it as something that's sort of this, doing violence to them intellectually, or they're doing violence to it, and I love that idea of poetry as a process of discovery,
Right. Well, I think, and then that, of course, shows up, like you said, when you're doing things like scrapbooking, which is something we both share, is that you're using this process of telling a story, and that you can explore your story in different ways with visual pictures as well as word pictures. It's kind of cool to think of it that way.
And I love the idea of, I never, ever know where a page is going to end up. I don't have no idea, what it would look like when I start. I really don't. I can sit there going, well, it's going to be about this thing, but I have no clue where it's taking me. And that is a really exhilarating feeling. Once upon a time, it would leave me tongue-tied and shaking, so worried that I was doing it wrong. But now it's just, I know it'll be fine. In fact, it's going to be great, but I have no idea how I'm going to get there. I will, we'll see where it takes me. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think there's a certain amount of that. But the nice thing, of course, is that in poetry, in scrapbooking, you can use different structures to help you, guide you, and make you feel more confident, I think, too. That's one throwback, at least if you make everything rhyme and you make it a certain length and you do things like you set a certain pattern, there's that kind of structure can be comfortable as well as sometimes confining. It can also be a way of liberating you so you can think, worry less about a blank page.
Exactly. And I think though it's worth saying that poetry and scrapbooking, right? There's so much more than just form. It really isn't just about kind of filling in the blank and making something look like a poem or look like a scrapbook page. I think it still has to say something, in a certain way. And that's why you'll still never see a page of mine where there's just pictures and stickers, there's always going to be a story. There really is. And I'm not belittling those, their creative expression is just the photo will speak for itself. That's fine if that works for them. But for me, it can't. I feel like there has to be this union, of story and image.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, because if you're just going to put a image and a pretty image on the page and some pretty papers and embellishments without story, I'm one who's always saying, where's the journaling to people?
Agreed.
Or you better have a real clever title that in itself tells a story. Because otherwise I might look and say, that's pretty, but it won't inspire me.
Right.
But, if that's what you like to do, and as you said, there are no real rules, but I think when you go back and if you want to share things with people, telling a story is always a great idea. And we all have wonderful stories to tell.
And you can kind of see, as a creative person, what matters most to you. If you go back to your old albums, what are you looking at right away? For me, it's just always what was happening. What's the story? What does it say? So it's just non-negotiable, right? There's always going to be the picture and the story.
Yeah, it's sort of a journalistic approach.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's been really fun talking to you.
I'm so happy you asked me to be part of the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just been a delight. And I look forward to reading more on your blog and exploring your scrapbook style. I'll probably post those things up on the Get It Scrap Facebook page, but or my own blog. But I intend to explore that a bit because I find your pages really intriguing, and I love your storytelling, and it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm welcoming the listener to take a look and see what Jill's about. So thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me at A Creative Approach podcast. Show notes from today's episode, where you can learn more about my guest, are available on the webpage, www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com. You'll find links to our past shows with show notes for those episodes available there too. Also, do subscribe to A Creative Approach podcast on your favorite podcast form.